Think about that psychology and pass that down. And keep in mind, you have syphilis, you have all these other, you have the lynching, you have segregated schools. They don't have access to the same quality schools. You see that they have to go to the 4th floor down the street just to go to the bathroom. They're at a disadvantage every step of the way, and they're always fighting for every inch throughout the existence of Black America. So when someone like Charlie Kirk says some bullshit like every other group has done this, he's incredibly stupid or incredibly disingenuous. Let's continue our trend of talking about social and political issues. And if you have followed along, either on my Facebook or on my live streams, I've been talking a lot about political integrity and accountability. And I think it's important to continue this conversation. I'm still trying to find my voice. I'm still trying to figure out what exactly I want to hone in on. What do I want to really focus on in both what I talk about and also what I'm pursuing in the world of politics. I don't look forward to running for any sort of office. That's not something that I care to do. It looks like that might be something that I move towards just to get more experience, because I have always been a person that, even if I have a strong opinion about something, I still want to understand the other side before I ultimately come to a final decision or make a decision one way or the other. It varies in life, you know, career choices, things that I want to, like hobbies I pick up, people I want to associate with, etc. So, you know, I've been very critical of MAGA and a lot of conservative Christians, people who support Donald Trump essentially, and people who are misrepresenting reality or misrepresenting statistics for their favor. One of those people, of course, is the controversial figure of Charlie Kirk. I feel like I have to keep saying this just to make sure that things aren't used against me, but I am not someone who is a fan of violence of any kind. I love martial arts. I love sparring. I love fighting in an organized manner, but I do not and will not ever like violence for the sake of violence because I don't like someone's opinion. So I am not advocating or celebrating his death, but I do want to be very open and honest about criticizing who he was as a person. And I believe that who he was as a person and the content that still exists online is a bad person. I don't think he was a great role model. I think he was someone who had his own viewpoint, whether he believed it or not, I don't know. A lot of people might call him a grifter. I think he's a very intelligent individual, but I also think that for whatever reason, he chose to put down or degrade other groups of people for his own benefit. And again, I don't know if he believes these things or not, but I want to talk about them and I want to analyze them. And so I have another video today from Charlie Kirk where he is talking to another student at a college campus, and they're talking about the truth about Black culture. This is straight from his channel, so I'm not watching like a reaction of somebody from his channel. I'm watching or clips. It's the full video that he uploaded from his channel. I think it's important to go right to the source. If you followed me on social media, then you would, or on Facebook specifically, I've been going to Truth Social and taking posts from Donald Trump specifically and sharing and talking about those. So I want to continue to do that. I want to do this so that hopefully other people don't necessarily have to, but I do think it's important that people who feel strongly about something, who are opinionated, have to challenge themselves by going to where those people are conversating and talking and going to those sources rather than going to CNN and grabbing their kind of cherry-picked point of view. I don't like having my opinion be skewed by other people rather than just what actually happened and forming my own opinion. So let's jump into this video. I'm going to listen along as well. So we're going to watch this video from Charlie Kirk, and we're going to take pauses to talk about certain parts as we go. So let's go ahead and hop into this. Let me make sure you guys got audio here. Make sure that is good to go. Yeah, so I don't see any audio happening here. Good thing I checked. And after. There we go. Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this video. Also, I plan on uploading these to YouTube just as an aside. I want to upload these over to YouTube, I think it's really important for me to start editing videos more often. I want to actually start trying to have a better camera angle, a lot of different things. So you might see some changes throughout my live streams and more activity on my YouTube channel. For now, I've decided to edit my own videos and find out specifically what I want. So I'm trying to force myself to sit down and go through the whole process. So that aside, let's go ahead and hop into this video.
Right. So when segregation ended, right, black people, or when slavery ended, actually, black people were just forced wherever, right? So they had nowhere to go. And then there was laws put in place to put them into prison. And after...
Okay, no, what's your name? Guys, what's your name? Jackson. It takes a lot of courage to come up here.
Yeah,
Let's just take a deep breath. Okay, I'm not here to pick on you. I appreciate it. No, it's okay. I know this could be very intimidating.
Sorry, I was listening to, like, so for a little bit of context too, I watched about 2 minutes of this video. I didn't want to watch too much because I want to practice my skills of analyzing and talking about things in real time. And I do believe that long term, I'm going to have to educate myself and memorize some statistics. But for right now, I want to meet people where they are. And obviously, I can't converse with either of these people. So I'm going to watch the video along with you and share my impressions. And if needed, do some research in real time to talk about some of these topics. But I was listening to this in the 1.5 speed, and so we're going to slow it down to 1.25. If it's still too fast, then we will slow it down to just 1 times and go from there.
Let me make your argument. I'm going to make your argument for you, and I'm going to tell you why I think it's wrong. Okay?
So 2 things here, actually, before we get into the actual dialogue. So this is one of the reasons why I dislike Charlie Kirk, and at the same time have a weird level of respect in terms of his skill set. He is somebody who can be perceived as very friendly or approachable, or somebody that seems like he has everyone's best interest in mind. I'm not going to assume one way or the other, but the way that he behaves, it's important to point out that there's usually an ends to a means, right? Whether it's intentional or not, that's what he tends to do. So I'm going to play this part over again and explain the other half of this once I play it one more time. So let's back up and look at this.
People, when slavery ended, actually, black people were just forced wherever, right? So they had nowhere to go. And then there was laws put in place to put them into prison. And after...
Okay, no, what's your name? Guys, what's your name? Jackson. It takes a lot of courage to come up here.
Yeah,
Let's just take a deep breath. Okay, I'm not here to pick on you, and I appreciate it. No, it's okay. I know this could be very intimidating getting in a crowd like this, so just take a deep breath. Let me make your argument. I'm going to make your argument for you, and I'm going to tell you why I think it's wrong.
All right, so if you caught that, then Kirk does a couple of things here. One, he helps the speaker feel a little bit more at ease by being personable and helping to say, hey, it takes a lot of courage. He's kind of building this person up, right? He's helping him feel a little bit more calm. He's also telling the audience to, like, hey, yo, like, chill. This is hard to do. So on this end, right, I don't like Charlie Kirk, so it's important to recognize my bias, but I also think it's important to, in a neutral as much as possible manner, point out that this is a kind gesture. And you could leave it at that, right? You could leave it at the fact that it is a kind gesture. However, this is where my opinion comes into play. What Kirk also does is he tacks on an opportunity for him to take control of the conversation. So he helps the person calm down and make that person build some rapport with that speaker, and in a multitude of ways. One, by getting the audience off of his back before they get too hype, and also by helping him to calm down and say, hey, it's okay, you're brave, yada, yada, yada. He begins to speak for this person. And again, that could come off as very nice, right? I have to reemphasize this, and I know it'll get exhausting, but I have to emphasize the fact that on one side, this can be considered very kind, that he's trying to essentially steelman the argument for this person. But what Kirk tends to do, in my opinion, is that he smuggles in a lot of the way he words things. He tends to smuggle certain aspects that people don't intend, and sort of creates an argument that the other person feels they need to either defend or clarify, but they never really get that opportunity. So Kirk takes the offensive here, right? So this is a debate. So we have to think about this as not only just a conversation, but essentially a battle, right? I love martial arts. I love fighting games. So there's an aspect, you know, I like been getting into chess with my friends. So you have to think about these two as combatants, not in a physical, violent way, but in a way of ideologies or opinions and such. So Kirk is taking the offensive by seeming like he's being nice. He's disarming his opponent, right? And making that opponent feel more comfortable than speaking on behalf of that opponent. So that's something that I really feel like needs to be pointed out.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Is that fair? Yeah, sure. Okay. So the argument that is being made that you want to make is that there's legacies of injustice.
Yes.
And that those legacies impact one generation after the other. And when those things get handed down, you have what is a system or a systemic issue that isn't just isolated in 2024. So the argument that you're making is that what happened in 1954 does impact 2024 of decade after decade after decade. Let me tell you my response to that. Of course, there's some truth to that.
Again, so I do think that so far his explanation is not bad. I think that he does a good job of surmising some of the history of Black people. Now, the issue is he doesn't ever confirm this with the speaker before he starts to counter it. So he created the argument and is now starting to counter the argument that he himself created. He didn't allow the speaker to talk about the nuances and the issues that he specifically wanted to talk about. He chose to just go ahead and again take the offensive and start talking about it. It's like you're having a conversation, right? And let's say for whatever reason you're really flustered, right? You're like, okay, I'm trying to make my argument, and your opponent goes, all right, let me calm you down and let me try to make your argument for you, right? You're saying that zebras are pink and blue, and that zebras have been pink and blue because of yada yada yada. Now let me tell you why you're wrong about that. And I proceed to explain to you why you're wrong before you even have a chance to fully explain your point of view and what your priorities are. I feel like that's very disingenuous and frustrating. As if I were the speaker, I would have interrupted him and be like, no. Let me talk first and let me clarify any issues, right? But because Kirk was able to just go ahead and say the narrative without any of the, like, maybe this guy wouldn't have said anything intelligent, right? We don't know. And I also have to point out that Kirk is on a schedule here. So he does want to get things done fast, but it works in his favor to get things done fast. It's like the conversation I was having about speed chess last night with some of my friends, where I will just play very aggressively and recklessly just to force decisions and make the other person think more. When I first started playing speed chess, it's like a 5-minute timer in the game of Outlast Trials. I lost a majority of my matches because I got timed out. I just was thinking too much about my decisions. So I was like, okay, simple strategies. These are the things that I'm going to do. And then I'm going to go ahead and do those things. And I adjust on the fly. But it makes my opponent think like, wait, did he do that knowing that this would happen? Like, they just start thinking about things. I see them slow down and I start winning matches from timing them out because I just have a strategy. That's what it feels like Kirk is doing right now. And I really think it's important to point these sort of things out. Because on my end, I feel like it's very disingenuous and a little bit conniving to do this tactic. But I also think it's important to recognize that he is a business person, or he was a business person and has a schedule to keep. So it's important that he does keep things going as quickly as possible. So it's important to recognize the duality of that situation.
However, every culture, every person in this audience can point to issues that families or generations prior had that we're able to overcome. So the question is, why is it that Black America is one of the only populations, that and Native American populations, that have not been able to overcome such evil, horrors, and injustices? Here's my perspective, and I want to hear what you have to say, is that the number one way to keep people out of poverty, lower the crime rate, and have a better society is whether or not you have a mom and a dad around. Would we agree that's an ideal? Yeah? Cool.
Yeah.
So this is, again, something that Charlie Kirk does that really frustrates me. He does a good job of summarizing certain aspects of the situation. However, he tends to hyper focus on one solution as if that's the only solution and as if there's no other context to be considered, right? Let's backtrack again, and I want to talk about this.
The argument that is being made that you want to make is that there's legacies of injustice.
Yes.
And the system or a systemic issue does impact 2024 of decade. Every culture, every person in this audience can point to issues that families or generations prior had that we're able to overcome. So
that is the part that I really want to focus on real quick. Really, really fast, he mentions two people, which is funny because I had this conversation last night because I'm African American and I'm Native American, and I don't really have a connection to my Native American heritage, but I still feel very strongly about the injustices that were done, not necessarily to my people, but to those people, right? And these are two groups of people that have been screwed over since before the founding of America, the colonies, the colonization of the United States, right? These are two groups of people that have constantly been oppressed, and that oppression has changed and evolved over the generations. So it's frustrating on an emotional level how dismissive he is when he says, yeah, he in a way he acknowledges that they've had some oppression, but he is very brief in that acknowledgement, like minimal details whatsoever, and compares it to every other race in America, when we all know that, yes, there's been injustices done to the Japanese, to the Chinese, to the Irish. There's a lot of injustice that's been done to a lot of different groups of people in America. However, Native Americans and African Americans are, in my opinion, unique in terms of the longevity of their oppression and the continuation of it, and how to this day they are perceived, right? I can't really speak too much on Native Americans, but I do think that there's a parallel, very, very different, but there is a parallel to these two groups, African Americans and Native Americans, natives, that they have never had a chance to really get ahead as a whole, as a culture, as individuals and such. I think that there's a lot to be explored in terms of Native America or Native Americans, and the whole trope about casinos and things of that nature. I do think that there is some groups that are thriving, but every group that is thriving, there's also groups that are not thriving, and not every group wants to exist the way that they're being forced to exist. Now, there are people, without getting too far into this conversation, because I don't want to focus on Native Americans for this conversation, but there a lot of times white people or people trying to speak poorly of African Americans will use an example as the whole, right? They'll say, oh, well, look at these people over there. They're thriving and they're Native American. What's your excuse? Why are you making excuses? Yada, yada, yada. And look, I am somebody who does believe in the concept of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. However, if you don't have bootstraps to pull yourself up by, or you never learned how to do that, it's really hard to do that thing. So I feel like it's very disingenuous and very dismissive and honestly, very mean or very evil to have that perception. So again, Kirk is over here talking about how every group has had some sort of bad situation, what's so special about them, but not really giving the speaker time to rebut any of the points that he's making.
The question is, why is it that Black America is one of the only populations, that and Native American populations, that have not been able to overcome such evil, horrors, and injustices? Here's my perspective, and I want to hear what you have to say, is that the number one way to keep people out of poverty, lower the crime rate, and have a better society is whether or not you have a mom and a dad around. Would we agree that's an ideal? Yeah? Cool. Yeah. And so what happened in 1964 is that 25% of Black youth were raised by a single mom. Today, it's nearly 75%, about 70%. So that means that 1 in 4 Black kids will have a father around. Only 1 in 4.
I feel like I need to look up this. This is one of those times where I'm pretty sure he's wrong about this, and he's been called out for this in the past. So I don't know in terms of timeline the other video that I covered. But if I recall correctly, this statistic is specifically Black Americans who have kids out of wedlock. And there's a whole other conversation about marriage and such. But on just at face value, again, he's minimizing the Black experience by saying that, oh, if they have fathers in the house, everything would be okay. No, it would not. If the people who are willing to leave their parents or leave their children and leave their significant other or their baby mama, whatever you want to say, if they're willing to leave those people in his theoretical world, right, forcing them to be in proximity to those people is not always a healthy existence, right? I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. I grew up in a family where there was a lot of physical violence in a lot of different directions, right? I received a lot. My brother and I fought. I've had guns threatened and pointed at family members and things of that nature. So I grew up in a family that was very hostile physically. And when I was old enough to think about things a little bit more rationally, I had thought maybe it would have been healthy if my parents separated, right? And also, this statistic does not talk about how many parents are separate but still are in their kid's life. So there's a lot of issues with what he's talking about. One, having a father in the house is not going to immediately fix the issue if there's not any sort of, I don't want to say reform, but education in terms of their like, helping them with their situation. There's too much nuance to just say, hey, fathers need to be in their house. But also, there's not enough to go by in terms of the context, right? You know, yes, father's in the house, but what kind of person is that father? If they're willing to leave their kid, you know, in his theoretical world, if he like fathers were in the house, what would that be like? Would they be abusive fathers? Would they be neglectful fathers? Would they be helpful fathers? Would they just magically know how to be a better father and a better spouse? I don't think so. I don't think so personally from observation, but to just generalize that the solution is to have more fathers in the house is pretty idiotic in my opinion. Like that's really stupid. But if you're a Christian conservative and you have these values, your logic is not attached to the solution. Your emotions are attached to the solution. So a lot of people think that, yes, what fixes the issue is having a full family in the house. But there's other steps that have to happen before that. And you'll see that, you know, the last part that I watched before I stopped this video. How's everybody doing in chat? Sorry, I'm gonna try to lock in because I want to do this minimal editing for the YouTube video, but I will respond afterwards. But yeah, you'll see that the speaker tries to talk, but he gets shut down, and that's the last part that I believe that I watched.
That's the number one issue happening in the country, and it's not because of systemic racism. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Okay, so I think I misjudged you at first. Like when you brought up the 1350 stat, I had like just assumed that it was like inherently like eugenics based kind of, you know. So, and that's where mine came from. Like I think we are on the same page that like we know what the problem is, and that's what I mean. Like
no,
the
and
education.
thank you for saying that, because I think we actually have a lot more in common in this country than the media would ever believe.
No, definitely.
Right?
I'll try to keep this brief because this isn't relevant to the topic, but it's still relevant to conversing and debating with people. If you're just hopping in, I mentioned before that Kirk has a tactic of disarming people or trying to disarm people and trying to find some common ground, whether it be relevant to the topic or not. And I believe that the speaker, two things. One, I think the speaker tried to do the same thing. And I would say that he did it from a place of more, he was being genuine because his demeanor, he's too nervous to be that strategic to try to just be able to have this reaching out of like, you know, oh, I misjudged you, right? He's saying I misjudged you, I misunderstood who you are. You're essentially a better person than what I thought you were. And he's being brave enough to acknowledge that. And I don't think like based off his demeanor, I don't think that this is coming from a place of strategy. I think this is coming from a place of genuine feeling, right? He genuinely feels like this person, Kirk, is he misunderstood him and is wanting to acknowledge that, maybe to build some rapport. I don't know what the intentions are, but because he is so nervous, I doubt that it's something more strategic. And I also think that if we're talking about a debate, he opens himself up to attack by doing this because he creates the common space that Kirk can now exploit and finds another opening. He already is on the defensive at this point and hasn't really said much of anything. And Kirk, the speaker hasn't said shit, right? In terms of the topic, he said nothing. Let's go back to look at Kirk. We're playing this in 1.5 times because I don't want to listen to all this for too long. But look at what this guy says before Kirk speaks again, and just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I think we are on the same page that like inherently like
I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I think I misjudged you at first. Like when you brought up the 1350 stat, I had like just assumed that it was like inherently like eugenics based kind of, you know. So, and that's where mine came from. Like I think we are on the same page that like we know what the problem is, and that's what I mean. Like
no,
the
and
education.
thank you for saying that, because I think we actually have a lot more in common in this country than the media would ever
No,
believe.
definitely,
Right?
And like what my point was, I was trying to say is I don't think that we're doing enough to help these black communities catch up. Where as like they're underfunded and they're not, and they're over policed, and there's just these factors that are contributing to, like you said, these single parent households.
Yeah,
like
so we're not going to agree on this. This is where we'll disagree, and that's okay. I have more of a view of Thomas Sowell on this, where he believes it's far more about culture, values, and worldview than stuff and over policing. I believe there's not enough police in black neighborhoods. You're going to disagree with that. Let's not even get into it, okay? But I think we can ask a question, and I want your opinion. Why is it that the single motherhood rate in black America went from 25% to 75% over 50 years, where America did become less racist?
Like, why?
I'm trying to pick and choose here because I got a lot to talk about. But one thing that I've been thinking about more and more, especially with Charlie Kirk, but I've seen other people do this too, is for some reason, people like Kirk like to talk only about black statistics. But have you noticed that he hasn't talked about something else that might be helpful for the conversation? He hasn't talked about white statistics at all, right? He hasn't talked about how what the disparity, what the gap is in terms of single fathers or single mothers in white families at all. And that might not be in favor of the argument that I'm making, but I don't care if it's in favor of my argument or not. If you were having a good faith conversation, you would use another like group, at least earlier in the conversation, then maybe it'll happen, right? It hasn't happened yet, but maybe it will. But why does he not talk about other groups of other cultures? Why does he talk specifically about black families and only uses the statistics that make his point? And the obvious point is that, you know, he wants to win the argument. He wants to be right for whatever reason. I'm not trying to put intent, right? I'm trying to be as good faith as possible, but I also think it's important to scrutinize what he's doing and how he's going about doing it. And the statistics that he's bringing up are an issue. On top of that, I have some criticism of the solution itself. And then on top of that, I have an issue with who he referenced, which is Thomas Sowell. He's an African-American that's been very vocal. He's more on the conservative side. And I've watched a lot of his content, and I was a fan of him. I think he would fall into, if I had to generalize, and I hate to do this, I hate putting people into groups. He'd be someone who would fit into more of a libertarian ideology. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with libertarianism. I'm not saying there's anything right with it. I'm just saying that's how Thomas Sowell sort of sees things. It's like, hey, we are where we are right now, and let's go ahead and just like make progress. And I to a degree, that's why I am individually attracted to that ideology, because I brought myself up from a lot of situations. But I've evolved my opinion in terms of how the country is run versus my own approach to life. My individual approach to life does not work for a lot of people. And that's why I've had to evolve how I feel like the solutions politically, how those solutions should fall into place, or where we should move, or what we should be talking about at the very least.
Why did it?
Yeah, so what caused black America to go from one of the strongest nuclear family communities in the country to now the weakest by far? That's okay. No, that's great. And again, it's hard to get up and have these conversations. Here's my opinion. My opinion is that, yes, there was some social welfare that subsidized single motherhood, which means it's easier to get cash from the government if you say you are single than if you are married. I think we can agree that's stupid. That shouldn't happen, right? But I would love your perspective on this. Do you think in black culture, getting married and staying with one woman for your entire life is elevated and celebrated?
No, not at all.
I think that's the problem.
I'm trying to figure out how to word this. One, he clearly stated this is his opinion, which I appreciate, but I disagree that that's the primary solution, right? I think that is a solution, but I also think that forcing monogamy, I'm monogamous, right? But not everyone is, and not everyone is straight. And I feel like he's forcing a certain kind of paradigm that not everybody has to adhere to, and that isn't going to fix the issue, right? The issue isn't just parents being in the house. There's a broader issue that is interconnected. And if you noticed, for the people in the chat, how many people know about the Greenbrier Rising or Black Wall Street Massacre? Have you guys heard of that before? Because I think we're going to do a little bit of story time here. My issue with this is that, yes, I do think that having more fathers in the household is an aid to helping black families strive, or any family strive. I think having a more complete home is always going to be helpful. But as I mentioned earlier, having a father in the house does not fix the situation. There's more to it than just that. And when he talks about why the black family was thriving and why they stopped thriving, he doesn't mention a very, 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 very important aspect of black history that happened in multiple locations. But one of the most famous ones, which I went to the museum in Tuscaloosa, is the Black Wall Street Massacre, or Greenbrier I believe was the name of the street. So we're going to go ahead and do some research here. So for a little bit of context, this is in the 1920s, but this happened throughout history. Okay, yeah, it was a New York race riots in 1919. So this is in the 1920s as well. So anyways, we're gonna go ahead and watch this video real fast. I think this is a really important thing to be a part of because, especially if you're trying to advocate, because I'm not a fan of like people. I always appreciate people defending, but I also think it's important that they understand the full history of Black America, because this really, I'm trying not to get mad, but this really pisses me off when people like Charlie Kirk do this, where they talk about why Black families aren't thriving as much as they could be. And I'll circle back to this. I'm going to try not to talk too much during this. We're just going to go watch all the way through, and then we'll talk about it afterwards and get back to the Charlie Kirk video. And then we'll get to Chapang.
Oklahoma had 45 Black towns and municipalities. It was capital of Black self-determination. Black people came for the same reason as whites, for new possibility. They saw in Tulsa an opportunity for business. Tulsa itself was a boomtown.
The reason was in 1905, an oil well wildcatter discovered the Glen Pool, which was the richest small oil field in the entire world.
And so when the city began to boom because of oil, it just drew more people.
These professionals and merchants in these smaller all-Black towns, they then migrated to Tulsa. They're coming by train, they're coming by wagon, they're walking, they're getting there any way that they can. And as this city of Tulsa goes from this sleepy cow town into something else, there's a part of the city in the northeastern corner that becomes the primary African-American settlement, known as Greenwood.
I liken it to a city.
Sorry, Greenwood, not Greenbrier.
Greenwood itself is an area of nearly 40 square blocks, with individual neighborhoods, individual churches that have their own parishes.
About 40 to 45 blocks of a residential community with a business district.
Greenwood community was staked out by a fellow named O.W. Gurley, who really is the father of the Greenwood district and established the first business there in 1906.
Gurley was a very community-focused, visionary leader who saw in Greenwood, the promise of creating a community where Black people could flourish.
O.W. Gurley and J.B. Stratford, they worked together and they had a specific intent to make African Americans wealthy, landowners, entrepreneurs. They both knew what the state of Oklahoma was offering. They knew that they needed to be very intentful in creating Greenwood.
These were members of a Black community who were showing Black people that a new world was possible. They were a sign and a symbol to Black communities about all of the wonderful things that we could be.
You have all sorts of businesses in Greenwood. You have everything from funeral parlors to theaters, hotel. There's a public library, a Black library. There are chili houses, cafes, restaurants. There's just everything there.
There were a dozen surgeons and doctors. There were several lawyers. There was a Black-owned photography studio.
There are Black working people. They're not working necessarily in oil, but they're working in all sorts of businesses that are supporting the oil boom.
Greenwood was a community of necessity. It was a segregated enclave. Black folks couldn't ply their trades or purchase goods and services in the larger white community, so they created their own economy. That economy became successful because Black folks did business with one another and kept dollars largely in the Black community.
What happens in Greenwood is that segregation, which is not necessarily desired, segregation actually enables Black businesses to thrive, Black professionals to thrive.
It was a district where, in fact, money, dollars, could turn over 5 or 6 times.
In Greenwood, you could, as a Black person, you could advance. And you had a number of individuals in the community that were prospering because of the success of Greenwood. Booker T. Washington coined the phrase Greenwood as the Black Wall Street, or the Negro Wall Street of America.
As the community grows in affluence and grows in confidence, these race men and women come to the fore. They articulate a kind of outrage about racism. They articulate a kind of self-determination. They articulate a resistance.
Andrew Jackson Smitherman worked as an attorney and as a journalist. He was a Creek freedman and teamed up with J.B. Stratford to create the Tulsa Star, the first daily Black newspaper in Oklahoma.
The Black newspaper at that time was a forum for pointing out Black achievement at a time when white newspapers presented Black people only in crime. But the heart of it was an agitation for justice and an agitation against lynching.
At the same time that's happening, you see in the summer of 1919 a rise of racial terror all over the country.
New York, Philadelphia, Memphis, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Elaine, Arkansas. We could go on and on and on.
A lot of these riots are really fueled by anxieties about Black advancement and Black success. And we're not only talking about cities like Chicago or DC or New York. We're talking about cities like Tulsa.
In 1921, those same tensions in the United States were present in Tulsa.
Welcome, Auntie.
It revolved around jealousy and resentment. It threatened the system of white supremacy.
Certainly in Tulsa, which is an incredible concentration of Black wealth. You can look at Tulsa as a tinderbox. Like, what is the spark that's going to ignite it?
So now you have the context of one of the most thriving cities back in the 1900s, early 1900s. You know, they're Black, they're proud, they're thriving, they're doing good, despite the fact that segregation is a thing. They found a way to succeed, right? They found a way to grow within the restrictions that they were given. And keep in mind that these are people who are ancestors of slaves, of people who have been abused for most of what they know, right? Most of them don't know anything about their African heritage. They only know about maybe their slave heritage, if that, right? Some of these people just kind of grow up. Some of them grew up as former slaves and now they have kids, so they don't really know their heritage. So you have to also keep in mind the psychology going into the people who created Black Wall Street and how they thrive despite how much is happening still, right? They have a newspaper covering lynching that's still happening in their time. They're trying to talk about the injustices happening at that time, right? And so that's important context to have when we go into this other part of the video, which is a lot less fun. It was very nice to see, I already know this, but it was nice to see just the history of Black people thriving, right? And so now we get into the other part of it.
Town Tulsa on Main Street. His name is Dick Rowland. He dropped out of Booker T. Washington High School, where he's a football player, to take a job shining shoes downtown. But he worked in a white patronized shoe shine parlor where there were no toilet facilities for African Americans. So the white owner of the parlor arranged it so his African American employees would walk down Main Street, go to the Drexel building, ride the elevator to the 4th floor where there was a colored bathroom. And the elevator operator in the Drexel building was a young white teenager named Sarah Page.
Sarah Page is manually operating the elevator. Something happens that caused the elevator to jerk or to lurch, and Dick Rowland bumped into Sarah Page. She began to scream. Dick Rowland, frightened, ran from the elevator.
We don't know exactly what happened, but we know something happened. Dick Rowland bumped into her. Dick Rowland stepped on her shoe. She was not expecting him, and she screamed.
And then Dick Rowland is seen running out of the Drexel building.
Sarah Page exited the elevator. He was comforted by a clerk from a locally owned store called Renberg's. She told him about being assaulted on the elevator. The clerk, who was comforting her, called the police.
The next day, Tulsa police show up at Dick's home. He's arrested. He's taken downtown to the courthouse awaiting arraignment.
That could have been the end of the story had it not been for the intervention of the Tulsa Tribune, the daily afternoon newspaper. The Tribune published a story the next day entitled "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in an Elevator." It was a false narrative about an attempted rape in broad daylight in downtown Tulsa.
The story was very incendiary. It used all kinds of buzzwords and menacing images that invoked this notion of a black man assaulting a white woman, which was a euphemism for rape.
The newspaper story is published around 3 o'clock. By 4 o'clock, a small group of white men have begun to assemble around and mill around the courthouse. This goes on for several hours. More and more whites showing up, murmuring about lynching Dick Rowland.
First, the crowd is 50, then 100, then 200, then 300, 400, 500 whites gathered outside of the Tulsa County Courthouse, in whose jail Dick Rowland is held in a top-floor jail cell. The crowd wants the sheriff to turn over the prisoner because they're going to kill him. They're going to lynch him.
When black people began to hear around 9 o'clock, 9:15, that there is a possible lynching of Dick Rowland, that's when J.B. Stratford, that's when O.W. Gurley, that's when A.J. Smitherman have a meeting at the offices of the Tulsa Star.
As the newspaper editor, A.J. Smitherman knew that this was a dog whistle, that this was the call for lynching, that it was trouble.
A.J. Smitherman was a civil rights advocate. He had a voice because he had a newspaper. Not only would he write stories, he would actually put his body at risk. I mean, he would actually engage in incidents where there was threats of racial violence.
And so there is a debate, and rightly so. What is the best plan of action? Is it to go downtown armed and offer assistance? Is it to just send, a small group, or send one?
The day a member of our group is mobbed in Tulsa, the streets will be bathed in blood. If I can't get anyone to go with me, I will go single-handed and then resign myself to that fate.
Ultimately, the idea of going downtown armed is what prevails.
At about 9 o'clock, a group of African-American World War I vets, all of whom were armed with pistols, rifles, shotguns, many of them had put on their Army uniforms, march up to the front steps of the courthouse, and they approach Sheriff McCullough, and they say, Sheriff, we are here to help defend the prisoner.
They were told, don't worry, he will not be lynched, and no one's going to take him. He's going to be safe here.
And the men leave. But the effect that the vets had on the white lynch mob is just transformative.
Upon seeing this group of black men who have come downtown, boldly holding their weapons, in this very manly, courageous way, it electrifies the whites.
They go nuts. Members of the mob run home to get their own guns.
And not only came back with weapons, brought others with them.
The mob is getting bigger, 600, 700, 800 people, armed, angry.
20 minutes, 30 minutes later, a larger group of black men return to downtown.
But they know that a black person is about to be murdered by a lynching in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they are not going to let that happen.
By this time, the crowd has grown to nearly 2,000, if not more.
One of the white men approaches one of the black men who's holding a gun and said, what are you doing with that gun? And the black man says, what's it to you?
The white man who's bumped into tries to take away the gun.
A struggle ensues, a shot goes off, and then another shot and another shot.
And then, in the words of the sheriff, all hell broke loose.
And the worst single incident of racial violence in American history begins.
Yeah, so without getting into all the nitty-gritty details, that town gets burnt to the ground. I believe they reference it in a TV show as well. I can't remember if it's Watchmen, the TV show, or if it's the other one with the King, the Conqueror guy in there. I can't remember what that one's called. It's like Lovecraft Country, I think is what it is. So, yeah, it's really important. This isn't the only instance of this happening, mind you. Like, it's important to point out that this isn't the only time that's happened. But this is like one of the biggest ones, especially at that time. So I think it's really important to understand the psychology of black people, because after this, you still have lynching, you still have Jim Crow, you have segregation, you have all these things happening, and black people have to continually fight just for equality while they're kind of being gaslit into thinking, that they're less than, but they're supposed to have equal rights. For all of the existence of of Black Americans, even now, there is always this argument about fairness and equality, and that we can't ever seem to actually get it without primarily white men finding some sort of way to argue against it. And you have things like syphilis. I'm not going to go into this right now, but if you don't know about how I think it's like the syphilis trials, but the short version is that Black Americans were used as a test with syphilis, and they gave them what I understand is a placebo, and just let the course of syphilis run through these Black Americans, and watch and documented what happened in them. You know, and these Black Americans think that they've been cured of syphilis, but they haven't. So you just have all of these horrible things happening throughout the history of Black America, and Kirk chooses to ignore all of that and say, oh, it's because the pappy ain't in the house. Like, are you kidding me, bro? No. What? Like, you can't ignore the history of Black Americans just being murdered and oppressed and so many horrible things throughout the course of American history. And then the fact that Americans, white America, I want to say white, like the people in power want to downplay and dismiss and erase this kind of shit from history. They don't want to talk about Black Wall Street. They don't want to talk about slavery. They don't want to talk about Jim Crow and segregation, but they want to have those things kind of be part of what they're moving towards. Like, why are we talking about if interracial marriages should be going back to the states or not? Why is there a conversation of if the states should decide? No one should be deciding who I can marry. That's the whole entire point, is that we're having conversations and we keep being like, oh yeah, that's not possible. Oh yeah, that's not possible. I was at the museum for Tulsa when I found out that Roe v. Wade was overturned. I remember we went on a vacation. My wife and I went on a road trip to Texas. We stopped by the museum, which was closed unless you had a reservation. And I was sitting in my car while my wife was checking out the museum and asking questions. And I saw on my phone, Roe v. Wade was overturned. Okay. So people that keep, like, it's like the same people who have to dismiss and downplay are the same ones that keep trying to make changes that oppress other people that aren't them. So it's really frustrating when people like Kirk do this kind of stuff. And yes, anti-wokeness, welcome. I know that he has referenced Asian Americans before, and he talks about per capita. I'm not the best person to talk about statistics, but again, he tends to use these statistics when it benefits him, but not when it's something that's measured fairly. Like, I have to have that example to be able to articulate it. It's a little bit farther away from the conversation that we're talking about. He was obviously putting himself out there to prove a point and gain clout off of political. Oh yeah. And then okay, I was like confused. I thought I was reading anti-woke's comment. So yeah, and anti-woke, welcome. I think this is your first time here, or at least you changed your name, because I don't see the first time icon on your name. But I like to be open and honest. I like social discourse. I like conversations. I like when people disagree. I like being completely open and honest, and not with the intention of being mean, but so that you know where I'm coming from. So sometimes what I say might come off as an insult, and I guess sometimes it may be, but I more so just want to say that because I think it's important to know where I am and like where you stand with me. And I don't know if I know you in person or not, or if I know you online, but when I see your name anti-wokeness, I can't help but lose some respect for you, not because you're anti-woke, but because you chose to make that your name and make that some sort of statement or whatever. So I have a hard time thinking you're not a troll just based off of your name. So when I'm replying to you, or when you reply, just understand that because of your name, I feel like you're either very misinformed about the word woke, or you're not a good person with good intentions, or you're a troll. Right? Those are the three possibilities that I see in my head right now. I'm willing to discuss that specifically, or just stay on topic. But again, I'm not trying to be an asshole to you, but I want you to understand, like, I'm not going to be nice to you because you're in my channel, but I'm not intentionally being an asshole to you either. But the way you present yourself leaves an impression on people. So we want to get back to the video so I can get to Trepang though. But yeah, I think a lot of people do that. Let me see here. I sincerely doubt that's often attempted to engage in good faith. Yeah, and I agree, right? From an opinion I agree with you. And I hate to say that out loud because there's a lot of speculation and I don't like thought policing or reading people's thoughts. However, if you look at the trends of how he has intentionally used, he's been corrected on some of these things and he chooses to still do it. You know, he's on a video saying like, oh yeah, I still just disagree. Like he chooses to disagree even when there's valid points to the opposite of what he's saying. So I have a hard time having respect for someone like Charlie Kirk when he clearly doesn't want to give context. And again, to go back to earlier what he was saying, how other groups of people have pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. Well, how many other people had their whole entire town, like their most thriving town, burnt to the ground? What do you, like, think about that. Think about someone who grows up and maybe you survive this, right? You survive the Black Wall Street massacre, or you're in another town that's thriving and you now have a choice. Do you continue to try to thrive and put your city at risk, or do you try to keep your head down and just do the bare minimum so that you don't cause a stir? Because it's very much a damn if you do, damn if you don't situation for a lot of Black Americans in this time. Because if you thrive too well, jealous white people will just kill you, and that's okay. So you tell me, when you follow that psychology from generation to generation, how do you think they're teaching their kids? Do you think they're teaching your kids to thrive and do well and make a lot of money? Or do you think they're teaching their kids to keep their head down, say yes sir, no sir? Or do you think that they're trying to keep their kids alive, or teach their kids how to be the best that they can be so that they can just get killed again? Think about that psychology and pass that down. And keep in mind, you have syphilis, you have all these other, you have the lynching, you have segregated schools. They don't have access to the same quality schools. You see that they have to go to the fourth floor down the street just to go to the bathroom. They're at a disadvantage every step of the way, and they're always fighting for every inch throughout the existence of Black America. So when someone like Charlie Kirk says some bullshit like every other group has done this, he's incredibly stupid or incredibly disingenuous. And I, again, tend to think that he's disingenuous and just chooses to not acknowledge all of this, because you can't separate the Black experience from where we are today. I'm not using that as an excuse, but when people just completely ignore that and act like it's not an important aspect to the Black experience and where we are, and then you just talk about fathers being there, and when I know that for sure, I won't say for sure because I haven't verified this myself, but I've followed a lot of sources that have shown these numbers, but I want to find them myself. But it is very likely he's misrepresenting these numbers. And when he's talking about 70 to 80% of fathers not in the household, he does not talk about how many of those fathers are still in their kids' lives. He does not talk about if it's in or out of wedlock. Now, I'm not a big fan of propping up or putting weddings on a pedestal. I think that's like a very arbitrary point, but I do think that outside of all the celebration and outside of all of the legality of it, there is a commitment that both parties are making, that the partners are making, that I am sticking with you through thick and thin. That is the part that is most important to me, and why I think it's important to recognize this in this conversation. The circumstances of Black Americans and Asian Americans. Yeah, yes. So thank you for reminding me of that. I was gonna say, like, again, I mentioned this earlier before maybe you hopped in, because I mentioned Asians earlier. I mentioned Asians, I mentioned Irish, and I mentioned, I mentioned Chinese, I mentioned Japanese, because Japan had a big issue during World War II. China had a big issue during the railroad rush when they were brought over to build railroads and things of that nature. And the Irish also were pitted up against a lot of different people as well, and they were not treated very well. So there's different groups that had different issues, but there's ways to you can understand how they were able to thrive. Like one of the biggest things, because I'm sorry, because this is annoying, and I have to look up the definition of per capita again, because I feel like people use that word, and I know that they're trying to just talk about in terms of like an average, but I cannot articulate statistics very well, so I'm not going to try. However, how many Asians can track their lineage back? How many Asians can go to China back? Like how many, I think it's specifically Chinese, just to focus and not generalize Asians, during this, I think it was like the 1920s to the 1960s as well, maybe a little earlier. These Asians came over and still knew their bloodline. And that alone isn't important, but they had places they might be able to go back to. Black Americans are stuck in a world where they don't have a home. They can't go back to Africa. They're too many generations removed from their heritage, from their motherland, and probably their parents or their grandparents, if they're alive, they're probably very traumatized. If they're alive, right? So to use these statistics, like you can't use these statistics in isolation or in a vacuum, because there's a lot of context that's important that has to be looked at. But a lot of people, when they're doing this shit, they want to ignore all of the context that really makes up the situation and just make it look like these numbers prove that I'm right. But that's not the case. I'm sorry, that's just not the case. So let's get back to this video.
Stems from a lack of education. I think these communities don't have
yes, legit. Yes,
the proper education or learning from previous to realize what will lead them to a more successful
I agree.
future. I think that if we funded more education in these systems, then these men wouldn't be so focused on stuff like gang violence to get protection or money or
you have a
other
great
stuff like that, and then end up in prison and then end up with their child having a single mother.
Fair enough. So
sorry, I didn't.
No, it's great. So there's a lot of examples that there's some merit to your argument, but it's more about the quality of education than the amount of money we spend on it, such as that's why I'm a big proponent of school choice and educational vouchers and opposing the teacher unions. But the core is this, is that the number one predictor for a kid of any skin color, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, is whether or not dad is around. Right. And I look as an outsider.
What? I'd like to know the source of his reference and how he can measure this. Does anybody know the source that he's referring to for this sort of statistic?
At current black culture, right, from the athletes to the rap music to the music, I don't see the nuclear family elevated.
And again, this is based off of an opinion. Like he's building an argument based off of his personal opinion, based off of his personal values. This isn't something that's factually true, but he's building an argument on top of his opinion. And there isn't any source that I know of to reference this. So it's really it's like, what are we doing here really? Because it seems like he's going out of his way to belittle black people. And when I say belittle, he's making it seem like there's no valid reason why we shouldn't be succeeding better other than the fact that fathers aren't in their home. Therefore, black fathers are not reliable. So like he's not doing anything constructive here other than saying fathers need to be in their house. But the guy is actually, I agree with the person that there has to be something more than just black father. Like you can't just force fathers to be in the house and that's it. What's your solution to having black fathers? Like what is the actionable thing that we can do here?
Or is it an internal black cultural expectation? Now, I will ask some of the white individuals here in this audience, okay?
Also, that's a lie. Like, yes, there is an issue with black fathers being at home, but there's multiple reasons why that's an issue, and some of it is out of their power. And I don't want to get too far into this, but one of the points that I was thinking about earlier is that there's a lot of black Americans that are arrested or detained, and then I think it's like a 50% rate of them being exonerated because they're unjustly arrested. Like they're not guilty. They're not proven to be guilty. So there's a higher rate of black Americans being arrested than other races, even though I believe that like we're talking about per capita and all that kind of shit. The numbers are being skewed and misrepresented when we're talking about black incarceration, when we're talking about how many blacks are arrested. And here's the other thing too, is like when we're talking about black fathers being in the house, and like, let's take into account gang violence and other negative activities happening in our culture. If one person is arrested, what is the likelihood of them being able to continue making money? And how long are they unjustly arrested before they're able to go back and start making money? And how likely are you to want to keep like if you were the boss of that person that got arrested, do you want to take the risk in the fact that like, yeah, they got free, but like, for multiple reasons, why should I hire you back? I hired somebody else because you took too long. So a lot of people's lives are ruined just because they're unjustly arrested. So again, when Charlie Kirk is talking about these numbers about black fathers not being in the fucking house, he's not talking about all the context and all the issues and all the systemic problems that led to the black fathers not being in the goddamn house. So when they do this shit, and he's not being genuine, and he's not representing the argument to its fullest extent and giving full context to the situation that black experienced throughout the history of America, I have a hard time believing that he has good intentions or what the fuck he's saying. Because How can you ignore all of what I just said? Well, he's a smart person and he knows a lot of stuff. What else am I supposed to think about this person when he's ignoring everything that we just covered, on top of many other things that I don't have the time to talk about today, on top of all the statistics that he's probably misrepresenting that I don't care to actually look into at this time, but will do later?
If you guys got pregnant and all of a sudden you didn't even know who the father was around, well, how would your parents react? Not great, right? Yes. Unfortunately, in Black America, this is kind of accepted. Would you agree?
I can't say. I grew up around a lot of white people, so I can't.
All right.
say
Okay.
I'm,
So, but it is a fact that
sure.
is accepted,
I-
right?
I-
So that's
yeah.
the problem.
He snuck that in there. They're both assuming that this is the case. There's so many times that I can just pause and talk about stuff that's a problem here. That there clearly needs to be more of a breakdown. And again, at the top of this breakdown, I mentioned that he's on a time crunch. So there are objectively rational reasons for him wanting to get through this fast and talk about things, but it benefits him as a, like we talked about speed chess. It benefits him to keep his opponent on the back foot because he just wants to farm content and look good and build his fan base. He doesn't actually care. This is an assumption, but I don't think he actually cares, because if he did, he would do his due diligence and actually try to understand the situation a little bit more.
Norm that has then turned into the cycle of poverty. The cycle of poverty can break very quickly if fathers stayed with the women they impregnate.
But most of these fathers aren't just leaving. A large majority of these fathers are ending up in prison. Like, this is
good point. Why do you go to prison?
because you commit crimes. But
okay, yeah.
the prison
Thanks for joining.
has been targeted against minorities.
Again, we're not going to agree here.
right,
That's okay.
yeah.
There's actually under enforcement of the laws when it comes where there's
So frustrating. This speaker, brings up a very valid point. And all Charlie Kirk can do is say, we're going to disagree. But this is a huge component of the conversation. You can't just say we're going to disagree and then move on to a new topic. Like we just talked about several examples as to why this is an important part of it. The systemic racism throughout history and I don't know if I could even call it systemic or just systemic, because when an angry mob just goes and slaughters a whole city, that's not necessarily systemic. That's more social. Either way, though, it's still systemic. It falls back to systemic racism, because how were these people punished? Like, if we go and watch the videos, do you think these people were punished that burned down a whole entire city of thriving Black Americans? I'm going to take a guess and say no, many of them weren't punished. But hey, maybe I'm wrong.
For example, only half of murders in Chicago get solved.
Right, but are
that
they all black people, though?
Almost all of them, yeah. Like 80,
Well,
80
if they're not solved, how do we know it's black people?
Well, because it's a black victim in a black neighborhood by a black gang. So it's like you can assume at a great approximation that west side of Chicago.
50% of the murders in Chicago that go unsolved are all black people.
Not all. No, I said 85%. But we don't know who the perp is. But again, if you have a black victim at 2 a.m. in a black neighborhood, it's reasonable to say that it was a black on black crime. 90%.
Okay, and this is another point. I'm going to try to stop pausing the video. This is another point that I have to hammer home here, because Charlie Kirk does this in a lot of his debates where he talks about black on black crime, and he talks about how the statistic of the number of crimes committed, or number of violent crimes committed against Black Americans, is 80% Black people. They talk a lot about black on black crime, but from what I understand, the percentage of violent crimes committed against Black people is 80%. But the thing is, and that's not discussed in any of his videos, is that what is the number of violent crimes committed against whites by whites? From what I understand, and again, I have to verify these sources, it's about the same. And there's a good reason. The original video that I wanted to cover, I could not find the original video. I can only find reactions to it, and I wanted to find the original. So if I can do it, I'll do it another Sunday. But he likes to talk about the statistics, but he doesn't talk about all the statistics. Why for? Why do we do that? So anyways, I think it's a big issue here, and I got to check the chat in just a second. I'm sorry, I haven't looked at the chat too much. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I gotta decorate the wall a little bit more. I got color changing lights. They're all just set to white right now, but yeah, I'm trying to nerd out my background. Thank you. I appreciate that. The Zoom.
But no, but like half of all murders in Chicago are unsolved, which that means half of all murderers are walking free. So we have an under-enforcement of laws. We have the ladies here in this audience should know this. You know that there's over 600,000 rape kits in this country that have not even been opened or tested, which means that there are women who say that they've been raped and their kits are not even put in the system. There are probably hundreds of thousands of rapists that walk free in this country.
Yeah, no, our system is
No, what I'm saying is that's an under-enforcement of laws, though.
Yeah, of course.
I want to bring up another point too. I've been thinking about this a lot, and we're talking about black on black crime. Let's take a second to talk about white on white crime, right? And if you're white, like I don't like to generalize, so I'm going to talk historically, but it doesn't mean that like you fall into that group, right? Let's talk about this. Now, one of the good arguments that I saw is what is considered a murder, right? Because you can look at the statistics of murders committed by what race, and that's classified or defined as an act of violence, an act of killing that is unjustified. And I think on an innocent person or something along those lines, right? It's not self-defense. It's you killing somebody for an unjustified reason. That is one statistic that a lot of people like to talk about when it comes to like black on black violence and things of that nature. But let's talk about white on white violence for a second here. Do you think that black people or white people have committed more violence against their own kind? And not even including other kinds. Let's just talk about their own kind for a second here. Let's talk about white on white violence. Let's talk about the Revolutionary War. Let's talk about the Civil War. Let's talk about Holocaust Germany. Let's talk about so many other examples like Ukraine and Russia right now. If you wanted to be generous, you could talk about Israel versus Gaza. I think that's debatable, but you could put that in that category. Do you, how many wars do you know of African groups going up against other African groups? They exist. There are some atrocities committed by many black governments or African governments, but can you list off as many atrocities? Let alone, let's talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Let's talk about like the Vietnam War. Let's talk about Desert Storm. Let's talk about the Cold War and a lot of the espionage that happened behind the scenes. Let's talk about all that. Do you think it was black people doing all of those things? Do you think that? Right. So, yeah, no, it's not murder, it's war, but let's just talk about white on white violence, right? Or white on other race violence. But for some reason, we want to really isolate the black Americans as if we're the pedestal of all blackness in the world. Yet, for some reason, white America has committed so many violent acts. Now, I listed off things that weren't just white America. Ukraine and Germany were not Americans. But from what I understand, Nazi Germany learned from Jim Crow. They learned from segregation in America and took that and ran with it in their own way. And clearly they failed. But when you're the precursor, when you're the role model for Nazi Germany, that's not a good look, bro. So when people like to just pull out these fucking statistics out of their ass about black on black crime, when I just listed off many of the atrocities, a lot of black people, all they have is their territory and their persona, how they're perceived, their level of respect. Those things become high priority when in proximity to other people, when you don't have much and you feel like your only options are to be violent, to do crimes. I'm not justifying it, but when it feels like those are your only options because it seems like the world's out to get you, it seems like, hey, do you think these people weren't talking about the massacres that happened? You think their grandparents, their parents weren't talking about the massacres that happened on the hands of white people, on the hands of the KKK, on the hands of police officers, and a lot of unjust arrests? Do you think that those stories weren't passed down? Do you think that doesn't cause generational trauma? So when you talk about black on black crime as if there's some sort of gotcha moment for black people and how we're the problem on ourselves, you're not bringing into the equation white people and how they have affected our psychology, our history, our ability to thrive. When the most thriving city gets burnt to the ground as a black person, what the hell do you think? You're in the middle of, you're over in New York City and you hear about this story in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Do you think that doesn't affect you at all? Like, what are we talking about here when we do this? When people like Charlie Kirk take these numbers and take them out of context and misrepresent them and does it over and over and over again to college students in front of a bunch of other people wearing goddamn red hats. It is ridiculous to think that this person is speaking in good faith. I'm trying to be generous, but I think this guy is a horrible person. And again, I don't condone violence against him, but to act like this guy is some sort of saint I'm sorry. That is a crock of you know what.
It was terrible.
No, I know, but you said we have an over-enforcement. I don't think we have enough people in jail.
You don't think we haven't?
No, like I said, half of all murderers walk free. We don't even know who they are.
Okay, but I sure, whatever. But I'm talking. I don't think that I don't think that black people are as.
He needs to breathe a little bit.
More than
I can relate.
Of exonerations from prison are black people. Like a black person is more likely than any other race to be tried for a crime that they did not commit, and then to be released from prison for a crime that they did not commit.
That's not totally true. Let's pretend that it is. It's because they're in front of the justice system more because of the high crime. But let's.
You can't convince this guy.
Let's try to find some agreement.
I'm talking percentages of exonerations.
No, it's because they're in the system more though. It's because you have more cases. But anyway, let's pretend that's true. Let's pretend the system's totally racist.
Actually, there's more white people in the system because white people make up like.
But you also see how he's granting that the system is racist as if it's not the case. Like he's going down a hypothetical as if this isn't actually the case. It's a little bit condescending, in my opinion.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
And this person is being very accommodating. He seems a little bit like non-confrontational or a little bit nervous. So he's not really checking Kirk at all on this. But honestly, if he did, Kirk would obfuscate. He would do whatever. He would turn the crowd against him.
So you're just incorrect there, right? Like you're doing.
But they don't commit any crimes.
Okay, so let's be cordial. Let's be cordial.
You're not being, so let's calm down a little bit, okay?
You're not being.
Am I being sweet to this guy?
Oh, I stand corrected.
All right, let me ask you one question in closing, though. If you could say to Black America, here is more money, more stuff, more housing, or
more stuff. What stuff? What stuff?
More funding. I don't think because fathers. I think.
I like how a bunch of white people are in the background grunting and neighing as if they understand the black experience. I, to a degree, agree with the speaker because what even does it mean to have more fathers in the house? That's not something tangible that you can just make happen. You can't make fathers be in the house, but you can make resources more available to people. So Charlie Kirk is living in La La Land, acting like he needs to have his fucking Christian values be the solution when this other guy is giving a tangible solution, more education, more funding, more access to different like tools and help, right? Versus more fathers in the house. Which one is more doable? Which is more doable without infringing on someone else's rights? Fathers in the house? More stuff. You tell me.
You need to solve the problem from the bottom. I don't think you can just plant a bunch of fathers in and they're going to stay there. Like you said, they're just going to like in the culture. It's not part of the culture. So they would just.
It's hypothetical, meaning if the fathers were to stay.
Dang, I should have watched this video.
Okay, yeah, sure. I just knew for 100% fact that they were going to stay.
No,
sure.
we have agreement. So during the BLM stuff 4 years ago, did we hear anything from the national BLM leaders or anybody about?
He just said what I said, and Charlie Kirk completely ignored it. And it's a very valid point that needs to be discussed. He's ignoring all of that.
Black dads staying around with women they impregnate. Did anyone mention that? No. Why? It's the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue is if you have a father around, less likely to commit crimes, more likely to graduate high school, more likely to get a job, less likely to be in poverty.
How do we get there? Like this is what I'm like. How do we get there?
Well, the first of which is you must raise the standard of expectation, both internally and externally in the black community, that we're not going to put up with men, because we're both men, fleeing the women that they impregnate.
How do you enforce that without infringing on people's rights?
That we will say to men that flee the women that they impregnate, you're a loser, we're not going to tolerate you, we're not going to be friends with you, that you're the scum of the earth, that if you impregnate a woman and you just...
So you cancel them.
Run away from them.
Most definitely.
Do we do that right now?
I don't think all men do. I
think their communities tend to do that. He's not black, so he doesn't know.
I think this is very common. I think this is very common in just masculine culture in general, is that men won't do that too.
I actually think it's the opposite of masculine culture too. I think it's not feminine, it's something else. No, just fleeing from the difficult.
Well, no, but I'm saying in male circles, I feel like that is something that males would praise, or at least around my age range. That's something that happens.
So then I think we need to demand better. Thank you for coming up to the mic. I know it's not easy, and God bless you. Thank you so much.
Have a good day, sir.
So yeah, as you can see, I want to keep covering more Charlie Kirk videos because I'm so sick of seeing my Facebook feed of people talking about Charlie Kirk or using him as an example and honoring this guy as if he's some sort of hero. I'm sorry, that's not something that I can allow. So yeah, you can see that whenever the person made a lot of points that I was hitting on and they were ignored. So Kirk wasn't willing to have a real conversation. He was just trying to win the debate and win over the crowd. He doesn't really need to win over the crowd, but he's not actually conversing with this person and he's not debating in good faith. It's pretty clear.